Along this hidden corridor, even large ships can be forced to stop. A river that had been wide and calm suddenly becomes shallow, rocky, and filled with dangerous rapids. Yet strangely, places like these became the locations of some of the most important cities in the eastern United States. Washington, D.C., Richmond, Augusta, Macon, and Columbus sit along completely different rivers, sometimes hundreds of miles apart. But when their locations are marked on a map, the cities appear to follow the same long path. That path is known as the Fall Line. It formed long before the United States existed, yet it helped shape the region's rivers, transportation routes, and the places where people eventually built cities. So what exactly happens to the land and rivers along this corridor? And why did places capable of stopping travel become ideal locations for cities? This corridor is known as the Fall Line, named for the rapids and sudden drops that appear where rivers cross it. Despite the name, the Fall Line is not a thin, clearly defined line. It is a transition zone that can stretch several miles across. For that reason, geologists often call it the Fall Zone. It runs for roughly 870 miles, beginning around New Jersey in the north and continuing south through Virginia, the Carolinas, Georgia, and into Alabama. In some areas, the transition zone is only a few miles wide. In Georgia, however, it can reach nearly 20 miles across. The Fall Line is difficult to recognize on an ordinary map. There is no visible border running across the landscape. But when the region is mapped by elevation or underlying rock type, the pattern becomes much easier to see. Several major American cities suddenly appear to line up along the same corridor. This geological corridor became a natural location for cities. To understand why, we have to look beneath the surface, where two very different landscapes meet. West of the Fall Line lies a hilly region known as the Piedmont. The name comes from the Italian word Piemonte, which means foot of the mountains. The Piedmont sits between the Appalachian Mountains to the west and the low coastal plains to the east. Its foundation is made of extremely old, hard rock. These rocks formed during a series of continental collisions that helped build the Appalachian Mountains between roughly 300 and 500 million years ago. The mountains created by those collisions were once far taller than they are today. Over millions of years, rain, flowing water, temperature changes, and erosion gradually wore them down. What remains today is a lower, rolling landscape like the modern Piedmont. The ancient, resistant bedrock still lies close to the surface. East of the Fall Line, the landscape changes. This region is known as the Atlantic Coastal Plain. It is much lower and flatter than the Piedmont, and its geology is also much younger. Instead of ancient bedrock near the surface, the coastal plain is largely made of sand, mud, gravel, and other loose sediments that never fully hardened into solid rock. Some of this material came from the erosion of the Piedmont and Appalachian Mountains. Rivers carried it eastward and deposited it across the lower landscape. Other layers formed in shallow seas, beaches, and river deltas as sea levels repeatedly rose and fell over millions of years. The age of these sediments also varies along the coast. Some layers date back around 150 million years, while others are far younger. In parts of Georgia, the Fall Line preserves evidence of an even older landscape. The corridor roughly marks an ancient shoreline. During parts of the Mesozoic era, the ocean extended much farther inland than it does today. Waves from an ancient sea once reached the edge of the harder Piedmont rocks. The modern Fall Line marks part of that former boundary between the continent and the sea. This means that two geological worlds meet along the Fall Line. To the west lies hard, ancient rock shaped by continental collisions hundreds of millions of years ago. To the east lies a younger landscape built from softer layers of sand, mud, and gravel. Every river flowing from the interior toward the Atlantic Ocean has to cross this transition, and when it does, the character of the river can change dramatically. As a river leaves the Piedmont and enters the coastal plain, it can lose elevation quickly over a relatively short distance. This does not happen because the river is crossing a massive fault or a single cliff. The change is caused by the different strength of the materials beneath it. The hard rocks of the Piedmont resist erosion. The softer sediments farther east are worn away more easily. Over time, this difference creates natural rock ledges and uneven steps along the riverbed. A river that had been flowing smoothly can suddenly break into rapids, rocky channels, and small waterfalls. One of the most dramatic examples is Great Falls on the Potomac River, roughly 15 miles from central Washington, D.C. There, the river drops about 75 feet in less than 1 mile. Similar transitions appear repeatedly along rivers crossing the fall line. They can be seen on the Delaware River near Trenton, New Jersey, the Rappahannock River near Fredericksburg, Virginia, the James River in Richmond, and the Savannah River near Augusta, Georgia. The rapids do not look exactly the same in every location. Their shape depends on the local rock, the width of the river valley, and the way erosion developed over time. But the underlying pattern is similar. Each river is crossing from the resistant rocks of the Piedmont into the softer sediments of the coastal plain. These rapids created what geographers call the head of navigation. The head of navigation is the farthest point upstream that larger vessels can normally reach from the river's mouth before shallow water, rocks, rapids, or waterfalls block their path. Along many rivers flowing toward the Atlantic, the head of navigation lies directly on or very close to the fall line. The contrast becomes especially clear when we compare the river above and below this point. Downstream, across the coastal plain, rivers tend to become wider and deeper. Many are strongly affected by ocean tides. Tidal influence can extend dozens of miles inland, allowing ships from the Atlantic to travel surprisingly far into the interior. But eventually, those ships reach the rocks and rapids of the fall line. There, the journey stops. This creates 3 different environments along the same river. Near the coast, the river is wide, deep, and influenced by the tides. At the fall line, the channel becomes rocky and filled with rapids. Farther upstream, the river usually becomes narrower and easier to travel only with smaller boats. For transportation, the fall line was an obstacle. For settlement and trade, however, that same obstacle created an opportunity. Long before European colonization, indigenous communities were already living along and using the rivers near the fall line. Around the Potomac River, communities such as the Nacotchtank and Accokeek used the river network for fishing, hunting, travel, and trade. When English explorers began moving through these waterways in the early 1600s, they were entering a landscape that already contained established settlements and transportation routes. During the colonial era, rivers became the main highways connecting the Atlantic coast to the interior. Ships could travel through the broad, tidal sections of these rivers with relatively few obstacles. But when they reached the head of navigation near the fall line, the journey repeatedly ended in the same place. Cargo had to be unloaded. Goods could then be moved overland or transferred to smaller boats capable of continuing upstream. This process required workers, warehouses, roads, docks, workshops, and markets. Because ships kept stopping at the same locations, commercial activity also kept returning to those locations. Temporary transfer points gradually became permanent settlements. There was another reason these areas were attractive. Much of the coastal plain near the lower rivers consisted of low, swampy land. During the warmer months, these wetlands could become breeding grounds for mosquitoes and disease. Fall line locations were often slightly higher and better drained. They remained close enough to the river for trade while offering some protection from the flooding and standing water found farther downstream. Richmond provides one of the clearest examples. The James River crosses the fall line directly through the city. Richmond developed at the point where larger vessels could no longer continue upstream. At the same time, the river's powerful current offered another economic advantage. The rapids could provide mechanical power for mills and factories. Gallego Mills grew into a major flour milling complex, while Tredegar Iron Works helped make Richmond one of the most important iron manufacturing centers in the United States during the 19th century. A similar pattern developed in Augusta, Macon, and Columbus, Georgia. Each city grew near the point where a major river crossed the fall line. Augusta stood along the Savannah River, Macon developed beside the Ocmulgee River, while Columbus grew along the Chattahoochee. In each case, rocky channels interrupted river travel while also creating a strategic location for trade and industry. Washington, D.C. followed a somewhat different path. Georgetown, along the Potomac River, had already become an important trading center before Washington was officially established as the nation's capital. Navigation along this part of the Potomac was affected by several obstacles spread across a relatively wide area. Great Falls was one of the most dramatic barriers, but it was not the only one. Another navigation point, Fletcher's Cove, lies roughly 12 miles downstream from the main falls. This shows that the navigational barrier near Washington was spread across a broader zone rather than concentrated at one single waterfall. The fall line also became part of a wider social and political divide in colonial America. Downstream, across the coastal plain, large plantations controlled much of the fertile land and depended heavily on enslaved labor. Farther inland, across the Piedmont, many settlers lived on smaller farms. They often had more limited access to coastal markets and colonial governments. These economic differences helped create political tensions in several colonies long before the American Revolution. The fall line was therefore more than a geological boundary. It also became a dividing zone between transportation systems, settlement patterns, economies, and communities. Rivers are no longer the primary transportation routes for most American cities, but the influence of the fall line did not disappear when ships, canals, and water-powered mills became less important. Its legacy can still be seen in the political geography of the United States. Several states placed or moved their capitals farther inland, often near the head of navigation. These locations could still be reached by river, but they were farther from the coast and therefore less exposed to naval attack. Richmond and several other capitals along the East Coast followed parts of this pattern. The transfer points that had grown into markets and manufacturing centers were eventually connected by roads. During the 19th century, railroad lines linked cities that had already developed along the fall line. Modern highways later connected many of those same urban centers. Interstate 95 and US Route 1 now follow a corridor connecting several major fall line cities. This does not mean highway engineers deliberately designed the roads to follow the underlying Piedmont rocks. The highways connected cities that had already existed along this corridor for generations. Geology influenced the rivers. The rivers influenced early transportation. Transportation helped determine where trade centers and cities developed. Modern roads then connected the cities that were already there. In Richmond, the same James River rapids that once blocked colonial vessels are now used for whitewater rafting in the middle of the city. The fall line, however, cannot explain the entire history of every city along it. Washington, D.C. was created through a political decision. Richmond grew as a capital and an industrial center. Augusta, Macon, and Columbus expanded through agriculture, the cotton economy, enslaved labor, trade, and textile manufacturing. The fall line provided a valuable starting location. Economics, politics, migration, and technology determined how large and influential each city eventually became. Cities across the eastern United States have continued to expand and change. Yet many of their oldest neighborhoods and downtown districts still stand near a geological boundary formed hundreds of millions of years ago. Long before the United States drew its borders, the Earth had already shaped the places where people would gather.